Ever since I posted my Tears of the Kingdom video a few days ago, I've learned something. People are complaining that the game looks like DLC, and while a year ago I think that conversation could have been had, that's not the case anymore. The truth is, if you think this game looks like DLC, you have no idea what you're talking about. If you think this, if you think like this, you fundamentally have no clue what DLC even is and has historically been. This game is a sequel, through and through, and no amount of asset or reusing of the map changes that. I guess over the past decade, with DLC becoming more and more common, and in particular, big DLC becoming super prominent, people have sort of lost sight of what makes content DLC rather than a whole new game. So let me try and educate you. DLC is traditionally something small. Usually it is a fraction of the scale of the full game. Oftentimes, this DLC comes in the form of a few extra missions, a new difficulty mode, or a new map or two in a multiplayer shooter, game, whatever it is. But when I think of a good, modern DLC, especially in a single-player context, I think of Horizon Zero Dawn's Frozen Wilds expansion, the Octo expansion in Splatoon 2, and the recent LEGO or Hot Wheels expansions in the Forza Horizon series. All of these DLC add new content to the base game, but in no way are they reinventing the wheel. They take the foundation laid out by the original game and turn those aspects up to 11, usually offering more difficult challenges, a new, albeit short, story, and new areas. They might introduce slightly new weapons or cosmetics like vehicles and costumes, but for the most part, it is fundamentally the same experience as the base, just expanded upon. That being said, there are examples of even bigger DLC, though this is much less common and is usually reserved for MMO-style games, and these are usually promoted as full new releases anyway. They still reuse assets, they are still fundamentally the same gameplay-wise, but they add a substantial amount of new playable content, a new story, new music, enemies, etc. Monster Hunter World Iceborne and Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak are great examples of this, but here's the thing. Up until Monster Hunter World, any new major content that got added to Monster Hunter was released as a full new version of the game, a full new retail release, every single year. But as time went on and DLC became more commonplace and accepted by the community, Capcom shifted to releasing new game price expansions instead. Destiny is another great example because when that game was released back in 2014, they released a couple of standard DLC packs like you'd expect, but then, when Destiny 2 came out just 2 years later, they shifted to releasing massive expansions instead of sequels. Content-wise, these are sequels. They are released at full retail price for a new game in America, they continue the plot, they continue the story, and in both cases, these expansions continue to get more DLC and content updates before the next one comes out. They usually get a new retail release, they are marketed as new games. 10 years ago, they would have been released as new games, and no one would have batted an eye. That's what a sequel is. Tears of the Kingdom is reusing assets, some music, and a large portion of Breath of the Wild's map. But the key difference here, the thing that separates Tears of the Kingdom from all of the different types of DLC I just went over, the thing that helps clearly differentiate this game from Breath of the Wild is its mechanics. Fundamentally, this game is going to play very differently from Breath of the Wild. As far as we know, all 4 of Link's main abilities from Breath of the Wild are completely gone and have been replaced by 4 completely new ones. Anyone that played Breath of the Wild for any consequential period of time knows how important those abilities were, and should be able to see how much adding these 4 new ones will change how you interact with the game. Now, I don't know about you, but I can safely say I have never played a piece of downloadable content that exclusively features new abilities that heavily change the way you play the game while removing the old ones. I've never seen that with a DLC. And while we're on the topic of removing content, let's talk about the map because this seems to be the main point of contention. They say, because they're using the same map as a base, that makes it DLC. Let me ask you this. Do you really think that the ground map, the map from Breath of the Wild, not talking about the new Sky Islands which look very substantial, do you really think it's going to have the same content? Do you think it will feature the same shrines, side quests, divine beasts, the same Korok puzzles? Do you really think they're going to leave all of that stuff there and add nothing new to it? Because I promise you, not a single piece of that content, once again, side quests, shrines, divine beasts, Koroks, will even be reused. There's literally nothing to suggest that, and even if the ground map itself is unchanged geographically, which it is, we know it is based on the caves and fact that the shrines aren't in the game, how could this possibly be DLC if they remove all of the main interactable quests and replace them with completely new ones? We don't know exactly what Nintendo was replacing all that content with, but there's absolutely no reason to believe they're going to release a sequel to the best-selling Zelda game of all time that's been in development for 5 years with less content, somehow? That doesn't even make sense. I was talking to someone who made a really good point here. She said that if this game took place exclusively on the Sky Islands, people wouldn't be complaining anywhere near as much. If this game simply featured less content by removing the ground map, people would be happier. And you know what? She's completely right. The sheer fact that they're reusing any assets or areas at all, for some reason just riles people up. If they're adding new things to discover, who cares if parts of the map are geographically the same? Now, to be fair to people more critical of Tears of the Kingdom, in fact, I was one of these people up until that most recent gameplay demonstration, the marketing for this game has done it absolutely no favors. I want to make that perfectly clear because while I'm glad they haven't shown too much at this point, because at this point I kind of just want to discover everything on my own, the marketing for this game has been pretty lackluster overall, but I do respect Nintendo for kind of holding it closer to their chest because this game is all about discovery and there's going to be hundreds of hours of new content to discover, which is awesome, so shout out to them for that. But I do I see where people are coming from, you know? I understand why people, before this most recent gameplay demonstration, were being a little bit more critical of it. With that being said, to wrap things up here, if you think this game looks like DLC, you simply don't know what you're talking about. Using that logic, God of War Ragnarok is DLC, Majora's Mask is DLC, Super Mario Galaxy 2 is DLC, Dark Souls 3 is DLC. If you don't know the difference between DLC and a sequel, that's fine. Just stay out of the conversation.